it's interesting to get sort of a deep insight into exactly how they're operating, especially in 2021, given some of the struggles that they faced dating back to 2019 when these allegations of corruption against Wayne LaPierre and other leadership came up, where they were accused of diverting millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars really over decades from the organization to their own personal expenses like private flights or vacations or luxury clothing, or even one point attempting to buy a house with NRA money for Wayne LaPierre. That fell through, but there was a plan to do that. But anyway, that you've seen, and it comes across very clearly in these documents, that the group has really shrunk significantly since that information came out. 2018 was their peak. They're about half of what they were back in 2018.
Yeah, if you think on the expense side, especially like how much money they're spending, it's fallen drastically. Now, like you said, lots happened in 2021 and 2020. That might explain some of this drop. But really, if you think of kind of on the expense side, obviously the high point was 2016, and we've seen kind of a steady drop since then. And you would expect kind of presidential election years would be when you see the bump back up. And it didn't happen. And so kind of this drastic drop, like you said, their expense budget is basically cut in half in the course of a couple of years. It's quite drastic, especially when you take into account the fact that while their total expenses have been almost cut in half, their legal expenses have been going up. So in terms of their other areas of expenses, the cuts are even more drastic.
Yeah, their legal fees, according to this document, now make up almost 20% of all their expenses. So $1 in $5 that the NRA spent in the first 8 months of 2021 went towards legal fees. It went to their lawyers, and I believe mainly the lawyers outside of the organization. So, Bill Brewer is their main outside counsel, who's kind of been the mastermind of their legal strategy since 2019. They filed for bankruptcy in 2021, and that cost them quite a lot of money. Even though it failed, their case got dismissed. It was a sort of a way to try and avoid the New York legal action against the organization, where the Attorney General there, Letitia James, who's a Democrat and a staunch NRA opponent and critic, of course, is also attempting to dissolve the organization over these allegations of corruption that we mentioned earlier. But Bill Brewer has been kind of the mastermind of trying to deal with that case and their sort of big play to file federal bankruptcy to kind of remove the NRA from New York jurisdiction. It didn't work, and it cost them quite a lot of money. I think that's probably a big part of why they spent $31 million on these legal fees.
Yeah, and the weird contrast here is, I would say it's kind of surprising the increase in legal fees, but it's also consistent with the trend. I mean, their legal fees have been going up, like you said, since 2018. We've seen, 2018 to 2019, their legal fees or legal expenses went up about 50%. The next year they went up another 12%, and now, from the looks of this report, we're looking at another double-digit percentage increase in legal expenses.
Yeah.
To be able to sustain that level of rise in expenses is pretty surprising. But like you said, there's lots of legal action out there involving the organization.
Yeah.
So,
well, I guess real quick, we can go over what the NRA has said about this report itself, because we've mentioned here the sort of the big takeaways. Their revenue and spending has been cut in half from 2018 to 2021. Their membership is down. The reason the revenue has fallen is because membership dues have fallen by half as well, and overall membership numbers are down too. And then their legal spending has skyrocketed. It's now nearly 20% of their expenditures are for for legal fees, which is 10 times what they spent on, I have it listed out here, education and training, competitive shooting, law enforcement, community engagement, the NRA range, the NRA Firearms Museum, and school security combined. So that just to give people an idea of how much they're spending on this, it's also more than they spent on all of the Institute for Legislative Action. It's their second biggest expense. It's second only to what they spend to get and keep members. That was still more than this, but it's their second biggest expense according to this report, this internal report. So, those are sort of some of the big takeaways. But here's what Amy Hunter, who's the director of media relations, said about what's in this report and responding to some of the questions that I presented to them. She said the subject matter here is outdated, unaudited financial report. Naturally, the NRA is not inclined to discuss non-public business strategies with those outside the organization. In any event, the NRA report is, as objective observers agree, very positive. We sank an ATF nominee who was adverse to the Second Amendment. We are winning many battles to elect pro-Second Amendment lawmakers. We're driving the passage of constitutional carry, the gold standard of self-defense. And we are confronting a New York Attorney General who openly vowed to destroy our organization. With respect to legal fees, we are defending the interests of our members against people who portray them as terrorists and criminals. The New York Attorney General called the NRA a terrorist organization and a criminal enterprise before she was even elected, without a shred of evidence to support her claims. And she also addressed how the pandemic has affected the organization, which is certainly, I would say, another factor of what's going on here. They made quite a lot of layoffs in 2020 as the pandemic began, and they haven't really hired back most of those people to this point. But here's Amy Hunter's quote again, second part of her quote. With respect to questions comparing figures from pre-pandemic 2018 to 2020, figures during a worldwide pandemic, the NRA, like many others, continues to confront this global pandemic that forced the cancellation of many events and impacted revenue streams. The safety and well-being of our staff and members is paramount. Through it all, the NRA has emerged stronger, better positioned to fight for its members and their freedoms. The association and its patriotic members deserve an enormous amount of credit. So that's the NRA's statement. Now in there, she says that objective observers will agree that this report was very positive. And what is your overall take on this report?
That's interesting. I wasn't sure whether to interpret is the report as positive or the achievements they've had this year. In terms of the report, I mean, I guess here's the positive part for them. They've certainly shored up their finances to the extent that they had been accumulating liabilities while their assets were not keeping up, and so the financial cushion they had gotten really razor thin. And in the past 2 years, despite the fact there's COVID, the last 2 years, we've seen that financial cushion get built back up. And so in terms of their overall financial health, the fact that their financial position does not justify bankruptcy, all those things sound good for their finances. I mean, I think the challenging part is the way they've gotten there is just by drastically cutting what they've spent money on. It's not that their membership has grown or that their donations have gone up. Their revenue stream has not been what's supported that. The revenue stream has shrunk. The reason their finances have improved is because they've cut programs drastically, or cut spending on them at least.